Good morning, college football fans, and we are officially done with week 7 of the college football season, almost halfway through the season at this point. Now, the moment that we've all been waiting for, let's go ahead and dive on into the Rankings Right Now predictive algorithm to see where the final predictions of this algorithm have the AP poll going into today. Now, if you are new to Rankings Right Now, we have trained machine learning algorithms on historical voting data to try and predict what the AP poll will be doing. And here soon, the College Football Selection Committee poll, what will they be predicting in real time? Will we take the current scores, the scores that have actually happened, and what's predicted to happen throughout the day, and ask if the AP poll were to give a poll right this very moment, what would their rankings be? Now that all the games have finished, let's go ahead and dive on in on where the algorithm is predicting the results to actually land. So here are your top 25 of the predicted AP poll going into week 8. Number 1, Texas. Huge win against Oklahoma in the Red River rivalry. They really didn't make it close. It got a little wacky at the beginning, but really started to steamroll them there about halfway through the game and moving forward. Big one against Oregon and Ohio State. This was the really interesting one to see if one of those teams had had a really big blowout win, would they have dethroned Texas at number 1? It doesn't look like. They looked as even as possible back and forth throughout that entire game. Oregon's going to move up to number 2. Ohio State dropping down to 5. I don't know about that prediction. I might have Ohio State down to 4, right? Both of those teams don't look like they're much different from one another, and they were already ranked 2 and 3 to go into it. The only thing that's causing a little bit of a hiccup there is Penn State's comeback win in LA, right? That's a really long road trip. That's a tough win in a tough environment. USC was ranked 11 last week before their loss to Minnesota, so that's a high-quality team. The algorithm has them predicted at number 3, Georgia at 4, Ohio State 5. So mix and match all those the way that you want, but I think those will remain to be the top 5 teams. Now, the next one that we should be looking at is the 6, 7, and 8 section right here. Miami has a bye, so kind of put them off to the side for a second. But in our Friday newsletter, we asked the situation, if Alabama and Tennessee come out flat and maybe even lose, what would actually happen to their rankings? The first part of that came true, but both those teams were able to pull out a win at the very end. Alabama survives a scary onside kick there at the very end that could have very well gone the other way. And Tennessee wins in overtime against Florida that had a chance to win it. Why doesn't Florida go for 2 when they score that touchdown to make it 17-16, right? Go for 2. Your season's over. You're not going to make the college football playoff. You're not a top contender in the SEC. You could dethrone a top 10 team at their house. You just need to get 2 yards. There's no reason to be kicking a field goal there. So that was frustrating to me, but we'll play around with that situation in the what if simulation tool here in a minute. LSU has a big win over Ole Miss. I don't think Ole Miss is going to drop all the way down to 25. Somewhere in that 18, 19, 20 range, maybe, I think makes a little bit more sense. Maybe they even stay in the top 15 because LSU is such a good team, and it's a road night game in Death Valley. That's a really tough one to play around with. So Ole Miss dropping, LSU going to be in the top 10. That makes sense to me. Everything else kind of plays around the way that I expected it to. Kansas State has a really nice road win in or at CU. They've played 2 really tough night games, one against BYU and one against CU. I think if they win that BYU game, they're actually ranked a lot higher than they are right now. We can even play with that with the what if simulation tool. Vanderbilt, another nice win against Kentucky, SEC opponent. We have the algorithm has them at number 22. Army remains undefeated, and it's still just crushing teams. Algorithm has them at 24. Oklahoma out of the top 25, and Utah out of the top 25. Typically, when I see a really big drop like this one, I think maybe not. This one, I actually think so. Right? They've lost back-to-back weeks against unranked opponents. They have a quarterback problem where every minute's a game time decision with them, and their signature win against Oklahoma State doesn't really look so signature anymore. So I have the algorithm has both Oklahoma and Utah out of the top 25. That makes sense to me. let's go ahead and dive on into the what if simulation tool. So for those of you who haven't already subscribed to our newsletter, please do so. Let's go ahead and play with the what if simulation tool. It's free to play for everybody. You just need to create a login for rankings right now. Don't have to pay any money, and you are given a couple of simulations every single week to play around with. So first things first, let's go ahead and let's focus on the Oregon and Ohio State game. If we look at Oregon and Ohio State and we flip that score, right? Actually, Ohio State had a chance. They were driving in the very last seconds. Ohio State tries to take or slide down for a knee to set up for a field goal, call timeout with a second left, 1 second too late. So let's say in this alternate reality, they were able to actually call a timeout with 1 second left, kick a bomb for a field goal to win the game. 34 to 32 would be the final. Let's go ahead and run that simulation and we'll just run the simulation and we'll show you that, just as a reminder for everyone who's playing around with this, you can always look at your altered games to see which games are altered in this simulation. So if that would have happened, the question is, would Ohio State have jumped Texas? According to our algorithm, no. It still would have been Texas and Ohio State, Penn State at number 3. Oregon dropping down to 7 seems a little too aggressive of a prediction for me. I would say Oregon might have just stayed in that 4 or 5 area. I think down all the way to 4, but Ohio State does not jump Texas in this scenario. So let's just go ahead and reset all the scores. I like to reset the scores and run the simulation to get back to what the actual rankings are, right? Let's say Alabama and Tennessee both would have lost their games. What would these rankings would have looked like? So in the situation with Alabama, let's say South Carolina gets that onside kick, makes a nice play or two, gets in field goal range, nails it to win 28-27, and then let's just say Florida would have really actually shown it up to Tennessee, win 18-17. That game doesn't go to overtime. What do we have here? We run the simulation. Let's go ahead and look at our altered games just to show that the Oregon game is not altered anymore. It's just the Alabama and Tennessee games. Where do we see these teams now? We see Alabama dropping all the way down to 19 and Tennessee at 26. Do I think Tennessee would have dropped all the way to 26? No, probably in that 20 to 25 range. But same thing with Alabama in that 20 to 25 range, right? Enormous shift, right? Really, really enormous. Now you have Clemson moving up all the way up to 7 because now there's room to grow in that or move up in those scenarios, right? Man, that would have really put the icing on the cake there, right? BYU's now a top 10 team. Notre Dame's a top 10 team. LSU moving up to 8, right? Really, really big movement up. Now, if Alabama and Tennessee aren't blocking the way there. Now, one of the last ones that we wanted to look at was what would have happened in the past if Kansas State would have beaten BYU. That would have been a really nice road win, right? BYU had just come on the scene, and that was kind of their show-up game to everyone that they're a legit contender. So let's go ahead and we can go in the past and say, what would happen if that game changed? So we're going to go back to week 4. It was a blowout win by BYU, 38-9. Let's say, for whatever reason, this game ended up being 24-20, right? And all these Big 12 games are always so much fun to watch. So now Kansas State wins this game. They win all of the rest of their schedule. They're now an undefeated team, right? Here's our altered game 4 scenario. Let's go ahead and run this simulation. Where is Kansas State? Kansas State's at number 8 now, going into after this weekend. So Kansas State's a top 10 team if they don't have that BYU hiccup. Doesn't even look like BYU's on the map anymore. So, like we mentioned, BYU's real big game was that Kansas State game, right? If they don't win that game, I don't think people are taking them nearly as seriously, and the algorithm isn't taking them nearly as seriously, right? So you have Kansas State right here that's fitting into that top 20 or that top 10 scenario when we play with the what if simulation tool. Finally, what other thing that we should start to pay attention to as we get closer and closer to week 10 is the college football selection committee. So we're going to go ahead and change this to get the data for the college football selection committee algorithm. And here is where the College Football Selection Committee would be making their predicted top 25. We've trained on college football selection poll data in the past. We have the ability to then reverse engineer the first couple of weeks to see where it leads into week 10. And here is what the predicted rankings would be right now. And it's not that much different than what we see in the AP, but a couple of smaller swings, if you want to call it, right? Oklahoma at 25 after their loss to Texas. Ole Miss only dropping down to number 18 after their loss to LSU. The top 10 teams are the same between the College Football Selection Committee and the AP poll, just a different ordering. Now, for those of you that are yelling at your camera, well, why would Ohio State be ahead of Oregon? That is just a bad prediction. I would have both of them flipped like the rest of you, but Penn State at number 2, it doesn't regardless, right? In the AP poll, Oregon's number 2. According to the selection committee, Penn State is sitting at number 2. But what's really interesting to me, no top SEC schools until we get to number 4, right? Really interesting to me, right? Typically, we see a SEC, or I guess Texas in the SEC. I'm sorry now. So Texas representing the SEC as the number 1 school, Georgia at 5, Alabama and Tennessee still at 7 and 8, right? Even though they've looked really shaky in the last 2 weeks, they're still top 10 contenders, right? Everything else looks pretty similar. But once again, Army's hanging in there in both of those scenarios, right? Utah is out after their little shakeup. We are seeing a ton of consistency between the two polls, so there shouldn't be any major shocks. The only other one we see that's a little bit different is Iowa State, at 11, which is ahead of BYU and Notre Dame. That's actually flipped in the AP poll. So overall, another really great weekend of college football. And another great slate coming up. I think we have Texas and Georgia coming up here soon. So it should be really, really fun, really interesting to see in the next couple of weeks. Thanks for joining in, and we'll go ahead and see you again for another week of college football and algorithm predictions. Here in the next couple of weeks, we should see updated predictions on the website on late Monday night. So go ahead, create a free login, play around with the What If simulation tool to see where the rankings are going to change. And thanks for joining in. We'll see you again next week.